This is a true podcast. We got a great episode filled with zombie people and money vomit and Devil Watch, of course. We're reviewing Fargo Season 4, Episode 4, entitled The Pretend War. Okay, so I just gotta come out swinging here. Devil Watch, we have confirmed the devil in this season and the mythical thing that Fargo always has. But yeah, let's just jump into this first scene, Dan. It was shot like a horror movie, first of all, and then there's a zombie man at the end.
Yeah, no question needed. I mean, yeah, this was head scratching for me at first. And it still doesn't totally work for me. It's super far into a different genre and tone than the rest of the show. But the only reason that you're really able to get away with it is because it's happening to the Smutny family. It happens to Ethelreda, and then it happens to Zelmar later in the episode. So it's keeping in line with that thing that they talked about in the previous episode about how the devil is following the family. Maybe this isn't exactly the devil, because we know who the devil is, because we're on Devil Watch here. It was an interesting way to start off the episode, and then it kind of jumps right into the next scene, which is tonally very different as well. So that was part of the shocker for me, was just the big tonal switch there. See, because the big complaint about this season, this show is like 14 different shows in one, and that like all the different characters are in their own sort of show. And this was the first time that I kind of felt that. It was definitely something very different. But what I do love is that each of these different so-called 14 different shows that these characters are all living in, all of them are really good. And that's why it's able to hold together for me right now. Because even though it does sort of jump around tonally, it's never bad.
And I think this episode does a particularly good job of like having the characters jumping from storyline to storyline pretty like fluidly. I think a big complaint I've had in the last couple episodes, which I've liked a lot, was just that each character really did feel like their own little subplot, and then they never got back to it. But this episode did a really good job of like weaving in. And just one more thing about Zombie Man is what we're calling him. No, but he's actually in the last scene of the first episode. But a few people were pointing out that there was a man standing in the middle of the street. Yeah, right. It's kind of spooky, but it just shows like that they were thinking about this early on. I'm
looking around. I'm recording this in my garage, and I'm looking around. I got chills when he said that. That's so cool.
Yeah, and that's when we were talking about Orietta being like the devil just throughout this whole season so far on Devil Watch. We kept saying like we're gonna look at these little things and be like, okay, that's when they planted it. And this guy, they literally planted him in the first episode in the background. It would fit because it's literally right outside of like the Smutny's house.
Right, yeah. That's so much fun. I do have just one more thing about the zombie man, as you've named him. It's funny because that first scene when it's happening, I'm not totally in. But then with the second scene with Zombie Man, it sort of retroactively changes my opinion of that first scene. It makes me like it even more.
Yeah, definitely strange. And the second time he came around, I said in my notes, this show is scary, haunted house, no. And then the next sequence is a montage of... I kind of compared to like a sitcom opening in some ways, because you get the cold open and then you literally just see every single character. Again, we jump into the episode and Calamita is stopped by a bunch of cannons, including Leon. I think, one of the guys said that Calamita was all bark and no bite, and I thought that was a little fun too. And clearly that pisses Calamita off.
Like you said, it jumps right into it. We were discussing last week whether or not they were going to retaliate. Like, we knew that they would, but we weren't sure exactly in what capacity. And, just right out the bat, we get an immediate... I mean, they burn a man alive. Like, there's a man that is burnt to death.
Who was that guy?
We'll never know, and that's an unanswered question, and that's why Noah Hawley is a hack. And then they brand Calamita, which just makes Calamita even cooler. I love that this episode jumps right into that. I love that we don't know the chronology yet. Like, we don't see Justo finding out about the situation. We just jump right into the retaliation, and then we find out later that Justo has no idea about any of this yet.
Just right off the bat, raises the stakes, you know. Not every scene has to have a zombie man, so.
Yeah, other scenes can have fire.
Yes, exactly. That kill the zombie man?
Whoa, that's interesting.
Anyways, the next scene is a scene I'm kind of worried about. I think it was a good scene. It's with Dr. Senator, but I'm worried that Dr. Senator is going to get trapped in that cafe, because this is literally the second episode in a row where Ebel and Dr. Senator meet up and just start talking. Overall, good scene, but I'm kind of worried Dr. Senator is going to get stuck in that cafe.
I hope that this is the last time we see him in that cafe, because it feels like this could be a nice little bookend to the first scene that we saw, because in the first one in that location, Dr. Senator gave this really long, cool monologue, and then Ebal returns the favor and gives a sweet little monologue as well, right at the beginning of the scene too. Like, just when you think it can't go any more Fargo, they go straight for the monologue, and it's like, okay, here we go. Yeah, I do have one quote though from that scene. Ebal says, "To be an American is to pretend," and it also harkens to the title of the episode, which is The Pretend War. Are we pretending like we're in a truce, or are we actually at war? And Dr. Senator says, not yet.
And then we jump from that to the cannons unloading the orange truck that they stole from the Italians, but also getting a lot of firepower, which I never think Fargo's about action or anything, so I'm like completely fine with them like dragging it out, like showing how each group got what. And here the cannons have a lot of firepower, which they're going to sell. Also, I'm just realizing.
And they're going to sell it to Fargo for devotion, which was fun.
First mention of Fargo this season.
Yeah, so far. We've gotten a few Minnesota mentions, but no Fargo mentions in terms of like the actual syndicate and stuff. I am curious to see if that actually comes into play, if Fargo literally forces its way into this season. And then also in that scene, Loy, again, deduces exactly what happened. He immediately is just like, no, the robbery was not the Italians. It was just two
Bonnies.
Yeah, exactly. I'm waiting for Loy to be wrong, and we haven't gotten it yet. So good on you, Loy.
Yeah, Loy's on a perfect streak right now, so it will be interesting to see his inevitable fall. Okay, and then I think my favorite scene in this episode, again, they're just jumping right into these things. Like, Justo and Orietta like had like a little thing last episode, but now it's like, oh, they're full blown like hooking up. And also, we talked about this last week, but we think this is the conception scene of one Lorne Malvo, which would fit, I think, because the scene starts off literally with like Justo getting strangled hardcore by Orietta. And I think the thing that I liked most about this scene was like, clearly Orietta is like filled with like so much rage at the beginning of the scene, but as soon as like they're done, she like goes back to just being like an angel. And she has this great line where she said, Orietta's no enemy to no man, which I will contend against because she really murders a lot of people. My favorite character dynamic this season with Orietta and Justo, we kind of talked about it last recap. They're an interesting pair, and they bring up Harvard again, so I think our predictions are probably going to be right about them.
Yeah, I thought we were going to get sort of a repetition of their first Coke party scene where Schwartzman just says one thing, and then she immediately jumps to, oh, I'll fix it. I thought they were going to do the same thing with Harvard. He mentions one thing about Harvard, and then she says, okay, I'll go bake him some, oh God, what was the pastry that he loved?
I am partial to the macaroon.
Such a good bad guy performance. Can't wait to see more of Harvard. This episode was lacking Harvard. Because last week, I was definitely joking. I saw that there were puzzle pieces working in this theory's favor, but I was definitely joking when I said Lorne Malvo was going to be the child of Justo and Orietta. But honestly, it's totally possible. I hope it's not, because it would just be so silly. It would be sort of like, I mean, this joke's already been made by like Red Letter Media, but like if little baby Han Solo showed up in episode 3 it would just be like a total like what, like okay, the timeline makes sense, but like why? But I do want to just briefly lay out the case for why this actually makes sense. For starters, I jokingly said last week that the reason that Lorne Malvo likes Lester and decides to go to his aid in season 1 was because maybe he reminded him of his mother who has that Minnesota accent. I think actually more so, he probably reminds him of how small his father is. And he sees what a small man looks like because he grew up with a small man for a father, assuming that Justo makes it out of the season. That's one thing. And then the timeline actually does make sense because this is in 1950. Season 1 of Fargo is like 2006 or something like that. Billy Bob, I think he was mid-50s when he shot Fargo. And Orietta is the devil because we're on Devil Watch. And again, I commend you for being on Devil Watch, for starting Devil Watch, and for tipping your hat to me on Devil Watch because I was not on Devil Watch.
So yeah, they're just like begging for Devil Watch and like Lorne Malvo Watch.
And the biggest puzzle piece is the fact that Justo says aces. Let me just go into the psychology of a Lorne Malvo for a second. He says aces as a total joke because it's something a loser would say. Who says that? Well, a total loser, his father. It actually all is lining up, and I'm going to be really upset if this actually becomes true, but also, like, it's kind of funny.
I personally agree with your sentiment. Like, I feel like good predicting it just because I feel like it's right there and it's so obvious. But at the same time, I feel like it makes the Fargo universe so small. It's like every season is just about these 5 characters. Like, every season's just about Wrench, Lorne Malvo, Lou, Molly, and like that's it. Like there's nothing else. And I'm hoping this season is setting up all these things to be like, come on, we're about to give it to you, and then they don't give it to us because we don't deserve it.
Right, which is something that I really commended True Detective Season 3 for. They were building towards, and without spoiling how the show ends, but they were building towards something really fantastical and kind of insane, and something that like would be a real fan theory like appetite wetter, and then they kind of pulled the rug out from under you and they were like, no, this is just a story about people.
To have such like fleshed out versions of like Lorne Malvo's parents would be cool, but at the same time I don't want to see it. I like to hypothesize about Lorne Malvo's parents. You know, it would just be weird to be like, oh well, season 4 explores like Lorne Malvo's parents, so you can say how fucked up he is because of that. It's like I kind of like him being like a mysterious figure.
Yeah, and I think it would be a real bummer if, I guess the last scene of the season, could you just imagine, it cuts to like Orietta giving birth after Justo has just died or something, and they're like, what are you going to name the little guy? And she's like, I'm going to call him Lorne Malvo.
Milligan and Justo have a scene. It's kind of nice. Also, Ethel comes to Orietta's house right afterwards and basically is working for Orietta now. Ethel is, so that's fun. And then there's a fun little teaser where it's like, don't open that door. And Ethel will, and we'll talk about that. And then Milligan and Justo have a scene. And it's not like there's any misunderstanding there. Justo like knows exactly like how it went down. And he's like, you're not fucking with me, right? So they're on good terms, and a civil war is brewing in the Italian family, you know, and it's right now it's Justo and Milligan versus Gaetano and Calamita. So you got your captains and your first mates, so it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I'm just kind of like going through it. Just stop me if you like want to touch on something in this scene.
Yeah, the only thing I want to touch on just briefly is that I was surprised that Milligan just went straight to Justo because, like I mentioned in last week's review, Milligan is like such... he's just kind of hiding in the corner and hoping to not be seen. So I thought it was interesting that he jumped right to Justo. I thought that was a good move on his part, though, because ultimately it is a move where it's totally self-serving. It was fun the way that he went about it. He's like... kind of hiding like outside of the building, and he's just like, hey, go over here. But yeah, nothing else to say about that one.
Cool. And then Otis and Duffy have a nice scene, nice interrogation scene, a classic cop. scene. And afterwards, Otis gets called by Milligan, just like in the police station. I think this was a moment I was like, it is kind of weird how like people are just jumping and teleporting from place to place. Especially because Milligan calls him, and then Milligan has a completely different scene after this. I think Milligan's in three
Yeah,
scenes
I
in
actually
a row.
really like that Defi doesn't have a lot of dialogue in this episode. I like that because I mean he comes really swinging in the previous episode, and I like that we just get to watch him watch other people. In this scene, he's kind of just staring for most of it, and he's kind of just casual about everything. And then in his later scene as well, he's also just staring and just in terms of performance, Oliphant totally gets the tone of Fargo. I think he's so pitch perfect for this character and also just for the show of Fargo. I think he could have played just about any character that they asked him to play. And in this scene, he's right on to Otis, and I do think that they're starting to turn Otis into sort of a bit of a comedic character. Like even his tics are becoming a little bit more comedic. They're always like leading up to somebody making fun of him, and he's getting a little bit more hammy, and it seems like he's even evolving more and more into like a noir cop. Like it's getting even more and more noir. So I don't know. It's just something that I noticed, but I hope that they turn that around.
And then the next scene is Gaetano Josto Civil War. And Justo just comes out swinging in this scene. He like literally shoots at Gaetano a bunch of times, and then while he's not intimidated, he doesn't do anything else to Justo afterwards. And I just love the scene, and I think it just is building their fun brotherly hatred towards each other nicely.
Yeah, he's rightfully so. I mean, this is one of the few scenes so far this season where we're supposed to take him seriously. And there's not really, at least if my memory serves me correctly, I don't think there is a joke in that scene. I don't think there's a moment that's like supposed to be like particularly funny. I was actually waiting because when he shoots the painting, I thought, oh, this is going to be a moment. Like he's going to shoot it and then someone's going to be like, that was an expensive painting. Oh, but this is the first time I think that I took him seriously also. And he still is such a child that it's hard to take him seriously at all, just period. But he doesn't play it up. He plays it pretty straight.
But he delivered it like very sincerely, and Jason Schwartzman has been doing a great job. And I know we like get on him for like being a little hammy, but he was really wonderful this episode, especially when he like breaks down later.
Yeah, and I really like Schwartzman in this episode. I think he grew on me a lot. I just wish that there were a few more scenes in the previous episodes where he was a bit more serious, just so that there's a bit more levity there. But again, he is playing a child and someone who's totally out of their depth, so I get that. And I think, like I mentioned last week, at some point, the story's going to break in such a way that he has no opportunity to make jokes. And at that point, I think I'll be able to forgive the previous comedy scenes because the show will take a different direction.
And then a fun scene with Defi, Gaetano, and Calamita. I just love Defi's carrot eating.
His Mormonism and his eating habits and stuff, they kind of take a weird turn where he's like, yeah, we had Italians in our town, and we tied them up and dragged them around until their heads popped off. And I just wrote in my notes, I was like, Mormons hate Italians, ? And you mentioned this, and you said it very eloquently last week. It's just about how all these different groups of people and different like ethnicities and minority groups, they're all sort of just at each other's throats.
I think just in general, like characters are good when they're flawed, but like I think they're really leaning into like each character's like inherent flaw. Next scene is Ethel finishing cleaning up Orietta's little apartment house. And it's a beautiful like one shot, and it goes in the hall, and it like pans in near the door, and you're like, oh, she's about to open the door, because why not? And also, Orietta has a cat. Thank me later. Devil Watch. It just gets progressively sadder. Devil Watch, I guess. No, opens the door, and it looks like a bunch of like World War II memorabilia, a bunch of cutouts of people she's killed, kind of showing that, and a bunch of poison. And it really shows that like Orietta is a murderer, and this is not her first murdero.
Good work. Good work. Yeah, it's a room full of drugs and a room full of like serial killer memorabilia. We mentioned before, like I was curious before she got fired, like is she the most prolific serial killer like in America right now? Like pre serial killer era?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because yeah, like the 70s and 80s and 90s and like so on were like characterized by like these huge serial killers. But the thing is, like, there were definitely serial killers before that just simply got away with it.
She's also able to disguise herself because she's not a creepy man. Because you see a creepy man in a trench coat and you're like, oh, that's a creepy man in a trench coat. He's probably a serial killer. But she is like this very well-dressed, well-spoken, like very well-educated, clearly, woman who like lives by herself with her cat and has a upstanding job as a nurse at like a pretty solid hospital. So she's able to just completely cover herself. And that kind of makes me wonder about her accent. I guess, well, it's too early to say, but I'm curious how much of Orietta is an act and how much of it is actually who she is. Like, are all these quirks actually real, or are they just disguises for her being an absolute psychopath?
Right. And it kind of ties back in with Lauren Malvo, how he was so seamless in his Frank Peterson persona as well as his dentist persona. Like he just like fits in there really easily, and that thumb up his ass. No, but it really like makes you question, like, because we knew Lauren Malvo before we saw these characters, but a really interesting thing they could be doing with Orietta, like you were mentioning, it's like this is all an act, but we don't show you it's an act until like the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think that's totally possible because I mean, the fact that she like speaks different languages and that she speaks with very impressive English, and she has like she's sort of worldly and cultured, but also kind of not. There's like little cracks where she kind of seems like she's just talking about nonsense, but because of those things, it's like I doubt she learned that in school. I think she probably taught herself a lot of what she knows. I think ultimately maybe to help disguise the fact that you're a serial killer and that you have these weird tendencies.
Yeah, definitely. And just like some quick stuff to remember about this scene, just for us in general, is like, so Ethel takes a ring and she leaves her notebook.
And real quick also, it's just, I mentioned this in the first couple of reviews that we did, but everything with Ethelrita and with Orietta is set up like a horror movie. Like the sound, the music, now we have Zombie Man involved, and the fact that Orietta is the devil and she leaves her notebook. It's just like a lot of horror movie setup type stuff.
Yeah, and then the phone rings and she like has to like get out of there, It's
exactly, yeah.
A lot of horror movie.
It's a big time horror movie, and that's where I don't know, because now we're becoming fully entangled. All the characters are sort of starting to meet each other and mesh together and move into each other's storylines. The reason I bring this up is just because I'm curious how Noah Hawley's going to tie this all together, or if he's just going to start killing people left and right.
And I feel like I was writing this down, actually. I think this is a good time to bring it up. I was writing down all of the main storylines from each season. There are just always a lot. So, like, I know one of the major complaints about this season is that, like, there's just too many characters and too many storylines. But, like, season 1, you had, like, fucking Lester, the hitman from the hitman from Fargo. Then you also had, like, Lauren Malvo, who was just a wild card. And then you also had the cops. And, like, every season, there's, like, 4 or 5 storylines. And, like, this is pretty much the same. I think they just dive into the side characters a little more. Like, Thurman has a bunch of his own scenes, like, in this episode. And, like, typically I don't think you would have a bunch of scenes with Chaz, in season 1. Chaz plays an important part, but that's like it. It's not like he has a character arc or anything. He like serves a purpose of like he serves the purpose of the plot basically, and that's it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think because in previous seasons, all those side characters, for the most part, like they have their little quirks because they're from Minnesota, but for the most part, they're kind of straight characters also. But all of them, they serve like the main plot, which is connected to the main character. And I think this season, we kind of don't really have a main character, at least not one that's been totally defined yet. You could say it's Loy, you could say it's Ethelrita. I mean, you could say it's Justo. I mean, not everything is as clearly defined. It does feel like everyone in this season is the main character of their own story. I think what it has the opportunity to do is if they can bring this all together, it's going to be the most fantastic finish to the season.
Next scene, I really like this scene. I just kind of wish something like crazy happened. Like I kind of wish Loy just killed Rabbi Milligan right there. But it's an exciting scene with Milligan and Loy. I feel like there's tension building. Loy really just wants his family back. He wants Satchel. He wants to protect Lemuel, and he'll really stop at nothing, I think. And just for Fargo, I think that does not bode well for Lemuel. And
we love Rabbi Milligan. I mean, we right from the first episode, we just wanted more of him, and we're getting more and more. And I hope we continue to get more and more, because Loy asks him, or when he starts sort of taunting him about how he killed his father, and he doesn't really say much. He just says you don't know me, or you don't know the whole story, or whatever it is that he says exactly. He kind of just stands there up against that brick wall. It's wonderfully shot, and doesn't say much, but you can read into so much. Loy really likes playing with his knife, and hassles Rabbi Milligan, and like you said, he's ready to go. He doesn't give a damn, kind of badass.
And he says it. He's like, every time I leave Satchel, I tell him, if I don't come back, I'm either in jail or dead.
We haven't seen enough of Satchel and Rabbi Milligan to really believe that there's a deep connection between the two of them yet, but I'm sure that it is building behind the scenes, and we'll see more scenes later this season. But you get the sense that Satchel doesn't feel loved by Loy because of the trade, and he's probably going to start to develop a deeper affection for Rabbi Milligan. And if Loy were to, say, kill Rabbi Milligan in that scene, I don't think that would have bode well for Loy going forward with Satchel.
And it's really interesting because Satchel doesn't really have any other scenes with any other character besides Rabbi Milligan. It seems like they're just hanging out in their own room.
I kind of want a full episode of just Rabbi Milligan and Satchel. I know that would be so silly and so insane, but give me a full 20 minutes out of the next episode.
Then money cleaning scene and the second appearance of Zombie Man. Swanee is still very ill. And Zelmar feels like she knows Zombie Man's there, and she just kind of calms down, and they have a fake out with Swanee that was actually kind of oh shit, that's another character. I'm oh, she's literally about to die, and she doesn't. It almost felt like the angel of death coming for Swanee in a lot of ways.
Totally. Grim Reaper shows up out of your bathtub and is coming for Swanee. That was troubling.
And beautifully shot.
Yeah, really good, actually. The shot of Zombie Man coming out of the tub was pretty sick. I like that we don't see his face too well defined. It's sort of blurred out in the background and stuff. That was almost a real bummer for me. Swanee almost bit the dust, and I was going to be kind of pissed because I feel like there's a lot to do with those two. I guess it harkens back to what she was talking about in the last episode, or 2 episodes ago, whichever it was, about how the devil is following the Smutny family. So there's definitely a spiritual connection there. Her awareness of it, and then also Ethelrita's awareness of it, because she literally sees Zombie Man, and they don't play it up as oh, it was a nightmare. that scene just ends. The first scene of this episode, it just ends with her being like, "Oh, that was a zombie man in my stairs." Only the Smutney family seems to be aware of.
I think the weirdest and most off-putting part is like there isn't some snap back to reality moment. It's just like this is happening.
Especially because it's an African American family also. Like they're like almost cursed, and they, no matter how hard they try, they're just like being followed by a zombie man and the devil across the street, and like they owe money to the mob, and it's you can't catch a break.
This is based off a true story.
Right. So I'm curious if Zombie Man looks just like that, like if he looked just like that in real life, or if that was like, like they did makeup or something.
They did a History versus Hollywood on it. Yeah, and he's actually he's actually a little thicker.
Oh, interesting. So that was a creative choice to make him thin.
And then after this scene, I think Zelmar and Thurman have a sweet relationship. This was a very nice scene where Zelmar gives Thurman the money to pay off his debt. And it's just a really funny moment of just like, I stole this from the people you're indebted to. Pay off your debt to them with this money that's theirs already. How Zelmar doesn't need to do this, but she genuinely like wants to help Thurman and her sister.
Yeah, as is the case with all the other seasons, often the criminals and the murderers are the most good-hearted, and that's the case in this one as well. And I like this is a big Thurman episode for me. Thurman really, in this last like 20 minutes or so, or 15 minutes, really, it's all him, and he really just stole my heart. He talks about how her sister Debril is just so proud and like make sure not to tell her. And like we mentioned before, there's such a strong familial love when Thurman is in the kitchen, like, and he's like asking his wife to marry him again and all that stuff. It's just like there's so much love, and you're hoping for the best for this family.
Yeah, and I feel I really thought they were going to take it away from us this episode. And then the next scene, again, I thought Thurman was dead. In these last two scenes, I thought Thurman was dead. Him and Loy have, again, it's like another sweet scene. Like, Loy is very intimidating in this scene. But Thurman talks about, like, his uncle Booley who died and was, like, making this whole, like, bullshit story up about how he got all this money to pay him off. And I think this is a time where Loy, like, almost messes up. He gets very close. He, like, believes the story, and then he leaves, and there's like a nice moment where Thurman's like, I thought you were going to kill me right there. And he's like, like I kind of did too, like a little bit ago, but now I'm feeling fine. And it's like, okay. And then Thurman like really awkwardly just like runs out, which is cute. Loy like smells his hand. I think vomit is so gross just in general. And I could smell, like Christopher Rock was doing such a good job, like smelling his own hand. It just made me feel like those like nights where like, like you throw up and stuff and like you smell your hand and it just smells like vomit, and it smells so gross and so distinct. He doesn't even need to say anything.
Yeah, that's so important, because that was something I was criticizing last week, was I hope that the vomit comes back into play, because otherwise the whole pie thing kind of was, it was whatever. And also that was another reason why I was going to be really pissed if Swanee died in the previous scene, because it just, like, it would have been kind of lackluster. But fortunately, there is a clear reason for the poison pie. It's because the puke has to get on the money, so that when the money gets returned, he smells the puke and then he knows. And so also, just two Thurman thoughts before we talk more about this. He's shaking, and he's got this glass of water, and he's got a napkin underneath it because he doesn't want to spill any. Just a really cute Thurman moment. And then also when he's leaving, he's about to leave, and then he turns back and he's like, you have a really beautiful home. And Loy's like, get out.
Here, let's just like do this right now, because we're just about done with the episode. What's your aw heck moment of the week, Dan?
My aw heck moment is actually the scene with Thurman and Loy. That's actually my aw heck moment. It's like so Fargo. And I guess what comes after that as well, like when they're in the kitchen and stuff. I guess that's one full sequence that I would qualify as an aw heck moment. But at the end of it, I was just like, I love that. I love Fargo. So for me, that's the aw heck moment of the week.
Real quick, mine, So it's two Josto moments. So when Josto's talking to Milligan earlier in the episode and he gets really angry and he starts like picking up snow and throwing it, super Fargo, and also just like such a little kid. He's like such a little kid in a lot of ways.
God, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I wrote a note down about that, but I forgot to mention it when we were there because I wrote down Schwartzman does the most with snow. He gets the most mileage out of like two handfuls of snow. He like throws a couple and then he eats some and then he spits it back out. He got the most comedic mileage out of that snow. It was really a great moment.
And another just a moment with Gaetano in that Civil War scene. He says, quote, "It's a gunfight, asshole." It's I think that's the funniest way of saying you brought a knife to a gunfight, especially like towards your brother. But those were my aw heck moments. And I think the ending is super aw heck. It's like, it's literally the definition of like, heck.
And the Fargo music is coming into play, and it feels very Fargo.
And yeah, that Thurman scene that starts happy and then DeBril gets super like upset and like, we're literally just in a worse spot now. And then Thurman has a pretty poignant line at the end where he says, "It'll all blow over soon enough." And very aw heck, like, damn, like this family just wants to be free, and like their one moment of freedom is actually not really, not yet. It's only episode 4.
So we've talked about how this is going to get bloody, and we've talked about we've gone back and forth on like who's going to come out on top, like the Fadas or the Cannons or who takes control of Kansas City. And this episode, I mean, the last 2 episodes, I guess every episode, but the last 2 episodes specifically, introducing more and more characters and introducing more and more the idea of like all of these different groups fighting each other and like kind of getting lost in the tussle, is making me think that at some point there's going to be a ringer that comes out of nowhere. And I think it's going to be basically like the white people. I think that at some point the white people are going to come in and just stand atop the graves of these two different clashing, organizations. And I think those will be the people that come in and take over Kansas City. And they'll probably adopt a few people here and there, like the lone survivors. But I'm expecting at some point we're going to get like people from New York or people from Fargo, or we're going to get people from out of town that just show up and step on the already broken necks of the characters that we've learned to love. So that's something that I'm thinking going forward, just because I don't see these two organizations lasting beyond the season, because Kansas City, as we know, becomes a big player in season 2. And, the way that all the people in Kansas City react to Mike Milligan as a black person makes me think that, okay, the Cannons, like Loy Cannon is not like the chief financial officer of this Kansas City organization,
It's literally like a company. It's become like a facility, if anything, and a factory pretty much. And in comparison to the Fadas and the Cannons, it's like they both have like way too much personality to be like a boring, like basically office like building that Kansas City has always been, I suppose. Like in season 2, like Mike Milligan got a promotion and that is what he got promoted to. It's not like he has like a franchise mafia in like Fargo. He's just working an office job now. And yeah, that's actually a great call, especially because they like talked about New York coming in.
Yeah, they talked about Fargo and they talked about New York, so the world is definitely big enough for that. I'm not sure if it's going to be like episode 8, a new group of characters comes in, or if it's just going to be like everyone dies and then the coda to the season is like, hey, white guys are here. But I do think that's kind of the moral of this season a little bit, is like everybody's fighting each other in the gutter and they're forgetting that like the real enemy is these white assholes.
Yeah, in some ways the colonizers, really. Which would be a really powerful ending to this season. I really like that.
Really dark.
Yeah, really dark, but also like very Noah Hawley.
And true, very true also to history.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, that sounds great to me. But yeah, the I don't really have like any other really predictions. Like I feel like we like got into them a lot last week, so
yeah, I think we're on track. We kind of like the first 2 episodes we were kind of like
who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Cuz everything was so completely all over the place, and there's so many different tones and genres and characters, and who is this guy and who is that serial killer nurse, and like it was kind of hard to see the connections. But then last week it really did start to come together, and I think based on what we predicted last week, we're on the right tracks and we're moving in the direction that we sort of anticipated.
Definitely.
So I think good job to us on our predictions so far.
And I think the Cannons are definitely going to retaliate against the Smutnies, which will just add like a whole nother dynamic to this war. And also the Cannons are going to be facing off against the cops with like Otis and stuff. And then, Deffy's going to definitely play a role in somehow in that. So, it certainly will be interesting. And, I'm really excited to see where this season goes. And, we're going to be at the midway point after next, episode. And, that's just exciting, It's cool that we're finally getting the season after it got delayed to September when it was originally supposed to come out in April.
Really great television. It's just not as tight as the other seasons, and I really don't have a problem with that. There's hiccups and there's some tonal shifting that is a little jarring at times, but it still is, in my opinion, must-watch TV, and it still is the king of television right now. Fargo has been one of my favorite television shows of all time, but certainly since it's been on the air, it's definitely top 3 probably shows. I can't think of anything actually that's better than Fargo. So, and I don't think this season's lost much of a step. It's just not as tight. It's a different kind of story. Like you mentioned, it's more novelistic, and I'm totally happy with that.
Yeah, very excited for next week's midpoint episode. It's a great season, in my opinion. Has some hiccups. I don't think it's like as perfect as season 2, but like again, I think I thought season 2 was a little slow at first too. So we can't really say anything, I think, until like we see the whole picture. And again, just like Zombie Man, it's like maybe some stuff is hiding in plain sight and we don't know yet.